Good morning, guys, and welcome back. Excuse my appearance, it's like 6:30 in the morning, but it's a really good time to avoid the gnats. It's right when the sun comes out. Usually, every last year that they've been in mass here, usually the dawn is pretty bad, and they're out and about and biting at dawn, but it's been unusually cold in the mornings this spring, so I think they're still asleep. So our meat chickens are about 3 weeks old, and they should be going out to the chicken tractor this weekend, I believe. Probably gonna do it Friday or Saturday because I work the next couple days. But that's exciting because they can get out of my garage and my garage can stop smelling like chickens. And I also wanted to show you guys, before we go out to the garden today, this cool little garden toy that I got in the mail. Now I have done 1 or 2 of these before where a company has sent me a product and wanted me to review it for YouTube or whatever sort of video I make. I get a lot of requests, guys, and most of it is not relevant to gardening. I've gotten a request to do like under cabinet lights, which would, I mean, they're cool and all, but I have no reason to get something like that and review it on this channel. But this thing was pretty neat. So they sent it to me to put a together video, like putting it together and then reviewing it. So I did put it together. It was ridiculously simple, guys. I was actually pretty surprised because a lot of these more inexpensive things that you put together yourself can be really complicated. But the instruction manual was more complicated than just putting it together. All you need, which is all provided for you, is screws, a screwdriver, which they give you, and a tiny little wrench, which they give you. And you just fit these pieces together exactly how they look like they should go, and you screw them into the pre-drilled holes. It was so fast, so simple, so easy, and it rolls, which is awesome. I haven't fully decided what I'm going to do with this just yet. Unfortunately, with the wheels, it is rather useless as a garden tool shelf in my garden because it's filled with wood chips and it will roll absolutely nowhere. But it is really convenient inside the garage as a potting workstation. So that's what I currently have it set up as. I've got my amendments, some garden soil, rooting hormones, my tools, and some pots and gloves, and it's pretty cute. I don't know if it's going to stay in use that way, but it's got a lot of space to hang things and set things on, and I just think it's super fantastic. Pretty cheap, pretty easy to put together, and the construction is all metal. There's no plastic that I could feel when I put it together, so at least there's that. So all in all, I think it's a pretty neat product. It's just it's a little inconvenient because I can't imagine you can take it out to the garden. You might be able to roll those small wheels over something like small rock or chad, but definitely not over these wood chips. So I can't actually use my little garden tool organizer in the garden. But as a potting station in the garage, where I usually pot up my plants anyways, super cool. This garden is so magical in the mornings. The squash in the in-ground garden is doing really well, and so is the bermuda grass. And my seedlings are finally getting big enough that I can tell how many sunflowers we're gonna have this year in the garden. Just in between these 2 rows alone, we have 1, 2, 3 sunflower seedlings, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And there's a couple more scattered in the other rows. If you guys remember from last year, all the sunflowers that were in the in-ground bed, they were mostly concentrated at this end corner next to my perimeter fence. So I've got a ton of seedlings here. Thankfully, they are all in the walkways, in the wood chips. Any that were really close to my squash plants I pulled out, except for one, because I don't want them taking the nutrients. But inside the walkways is completely fine. It's like these guys don't even need water. They are fantastic, fantastic sunflowers. Now this guy I did leave in. He is also a sunflower, and he's right next to a squash. This is the going to seed fig leaf gourd. I've got a couple of these throughout the garden. I'm not too worried about it. Sunflowers have a deeper taproot, like they send a taproot down, and then squash's roots are more shallow. Although that is no excuse to plant two plants about 3 inches from each other. Absolutely no excuse. I'm gonna leave it. I'm okay with it. Why not? I've got enough squash. If it survives the Bermuda grass infestation, I'm gonna have a ton of squash this year. My tomatoes here in this 10-foot bed are doing really well. I need to tie this guy up a bit. I've started tying some of them, but this guy needs some help. And this leek, guys, look at this. Look how tall this leek is. It's as tall as I am. Now I have had to replant one tomato so far. It was in this spot and it was not doing real well. I didn't wait to see what kind of disease it had. But I replanted it here with this Grand Marshal. And I think this Grand Marshal is doing okay. It also looks a little bit less healthy than these super, I mean, you can even see the color green compared to this one. This is just a little bit dull and lifeless. And if this one tomato ends up going by way of the dodo, like the last tomato in that exact spot did, I will not replant another tomato there because there's likely something in the soil directly underneath that spot that's bad. Either a fungus or it's just a bad spot in the dirt area. Like, I know I put logs in the bottom of a lot of these beds to break down over time, but sometimes I accidentally place a plant directly on top of a log, and they don't like that very much. So I'm monitoring these tomatoes on a daily basis, and if I'm being honest with you guys, I'm being slightly paranoid about it because of the last few years and the severe decimation of my tomato crop due to curly top tomato virus. I have done a video about this in the past extensively solely on this disease, so I will link that above and or below in the video notes. But I tried to put some pest fabric over my tomatoes this year. I'd even recorded some of it because I planned on doing a video about it. It's my first time trying pest fabric in the spring. The 60-mile-per-hour winds that we get here on my property didn't care about my pest fabric. And so it blew off no matter how I tried to tie it down. And it was really buffeting. Like, it would slam against my tomato plants. They were really young, fragile. It didn't work out. So we have no pest fabric this year. There's no pesticides that will kill the beet leaf hopper before it transmits the disease. So we're just gonna hope and pray that my entire crop of tomatoes doesn't get killed this year. But I still have a ton of tomato plants in pots from seeds that I started. They aren't looking on the great side because they've been in those pots for so long, but I am keeping them alive just in case I have to do any more tomato replacements, especially if I get one that has curly top virus. I can just quickly switch it out with a tomato that I started from seed. But those tomatoes are not going to last much longer. Fortunately, I have up-potted some of them into these pots, and we'll see how they do. I haven't had great luck with growing tomatoes in pots the last few years. I'm not sure if it's the heat or my soil, but they just never seem to do well in pots. But at least they have a better chance in these large pots than in my little seedling cups on the back porch. The stars of the show are these tomatillos. They have just taken off since I planted them out here, and they look so healthy. I've got little fruits coming up all over the place. And I was picking the flowers off for a while when I first transplanted them to get them to put more roots down and become a healthier plant. But But they were just throwing flowers out like crazy, and I couldn't pull them all off at once. They would just spit out like 5 a day. So I finally just let them do what they wanted to do, and I'm gonna have a ton of tomatillos here in a couple weeks. My onions here are just about ready to come out, and I could not be more excited to get these out of the ground so that I can replant this bed. And I'm gonna go over all of this in a completely separate video because I am gonna be doing one giant garlic and onion harvest with you guys. But this is how you know when your onions are ready to be harvested. The best example is gonna be this onion right here. See how its neck is completely bent over of its own accord, just falls over? It's because this neck got really, really soft and it will not hold itself up. So onions will typically sit straight up until they are time to be harvested, at which point their necks bend over at the head, just like that. And when the onion tops flip over, it means that nutrients from, because obviously the root gains nutrients from the top photosynthesizing, it's not going to receive any nutrients anymore. That onion bulb is not going to grow anymore. So when your onion top finally flips over and lays on its side, your onions are ready to harvest. Now, I am not a professional onion farmer, so these numbers may not be exact, but typically if you're growing like a large amount of onions like this, when your onion harvest about 50% of them are laid down, then you can harvest the entire bed. You don't want to leave the ones that have laid down in the ground for too long. You can do issues like rot, pest damage, etc., etc. So that's why when about 50% of these onions are laying down, that's when I'm going to come in and just harvest them all up. But like I said, that'll be a completely separate video, and I'm very excited for that day. I did already harvest one of the garlic beds because they were ready and they needed to come out. But I still have the other one, which is not ready, and the onions. And I recorded my harvest of this first bed, so everything will be all together in one video. And there's gonna be a ton of food. And this garlic bed I replanted with a bunch of peppers. I've got our bowl chilies in here, as well as this is a sriracha, a shishito, and a jalamundo. I believe this one's just like a larger type of jalapeno. This guy is another sunflower that reseeded from I don't know where. I don't know what kind of flower it's going to be, though it'll probably be the common Mexican sunflower that I get in here, just because those seeds go everywhere and the birds like to spread them around. I can actually see how this sunflower that I've brought into my garden can become a weed. The sunflower seedlings themselves are super easy to pull out of the ground, and for the most part, compared to the other weeds in the area, they're very recognizable. They look a bit like amaranth, but we don't have much wild amaranth growing around here. So I mean, it's not a bad weed. I'm not mad about it. It's pretty. If a seedling ends up in a bed where I don't mind it, like right there, there's only one sunflower and I made room for it. I'm so happy. It's a seed that I didn't have to plant. But definitely in that in-ground garden, I mean, tons of them come up every year. It's awesome. I really want to get them seeded in my lawn and see if I can get my lawn just completely covered in sunflowers. Wouldn't that be amazing? These two new garden beds that I built this spring are doing okay, though not as well as I wish they were doing. I believe it's mostly nutrient deficiencies that are affecting these plants in here. This is a calendula that was perfectly healthy when I transplanted it. And let me give you a comparison to this calendula. Which, yeah. Most of the large plants in here, these were melon transplants. They just look really chlorotic. They're just a very pale green and not growing very rapidly. So they're not dying. I'm not seeing any sorts of wilt or brown spots on them. I think it's just a lack of nitrogen in this soil. It's probably due to the fact that I use really crappy soil when I build my garden beds. And that's due to the fact that it costs hundreds of dollars to do it. But I did come through here yesterday with a watering bucket and some fish emulsion, which is basically just ground up fish parts. It's really high in nitrogen. And I individually watered all of these seedlings with some fish emulsion and water just to give them a quick dose of nitrogen. I can't say they look monumentally greener today. I mean, they do a little bit, but it's probably just me looking like confirmation bias. If I can manage the seedlings this year by just having to do some supplemental feeding, that's okay. I can do a little bit of supplemental feeding. I'm okay with that. Because I did do a fair amount of planting. Like all of this corn that is a super heavy feeder. And I had pretty darn good germination. I mean, there's a pretty big spot right here. I didn't get a whole lot. But there's quite a bit of corn, more than I've ever grown before. So even though I'm used to having pretty poor results on my first year garden beds, I would prefer if I had pretty good results this year. So I might be doing some intensive supplemental fertilizing for these 2 beds this summer, just because I went and planted a lot of crops that I wanted in this. Silly me. Freya baby. What are you doing, boys, girl? Beautiful, beautiful. Ooh, and for all my desert dwellers who have ever had a problem growing celery, I have good news. Okay, let's separate. There's 2 plants here. This is a calendula plant, but this right here, the thing that kind of looks like parsley, this is Amsterdam celery. So last fall, I tried out 2 different types of cut and come again celery, and one of them was, I believe, called New Amsterdam celery or Amsterdam celery, and I forget the name of the other one, but it didn't germinate. So this is the only one I got, and it did not do anything all winter, folks. I started it late because I thought it wanted cooler temperatures. It just didn't grow. I guess it was too cold for it, and it took off here in the spring when it started warming up. Which tells me I can probably plant it earlier in the fall this year, probably more in the heat of the summer, to let it get some height before it goes into winter. And right now, they're pretty small. This is probably about the width of my pinky nail. They're not very thick, but it's just this giant mass of a ton of these tiny little celery sticks, and it tastes exactly like celery. It's just like a mini version of celery. Now, I'm sure you can get these to grow bigger stalks, although it's getting to about 90s or mid-90s some days. And I can tell when I taste test these every couple days, it's starting to get a little bit more bitter, which is okay for celery, to me, I think. I use celery really only in a mirepoix or soups and stews. I don't often just munch on celery as is. So the flavor is really what I'm going for. But I wanted to let you guys know, from someone who has never been able to grow celery, because celery requires cool and moist conditions and a long growing period, this cut and come again celery, both seeds I got from Baker Creek, awesome, fantastic. I'm going to be growing this every single year, and I'm so excited. Here in my bean bed, I had spotty germination at the beginning, and you can see all of these plants which germinated first. They are rather large, but then I did a second seeding, and I've got decent germination on this second seeding, which is interesting because I didn't even put down pesticide for the roly-polies. But so this is filling out quite nicely, and I think I should have a full bed of California Black Eye No. 5 bush beans. Technically they're cowpeas. And then over here I've got a mix of, I don't know what kind of pole beans, and Armenian cucumbers. I think, so I had originally intended for my Armenian cucumbers to be inside under the trellis because they were out here last year. And I mean, I don't religiously practice crop rotation. I just like to do it if I think of it at the time. But I had no seeds come up where I sowed them, and they all came up out here. I'm thinking they required a bit more heat than I thought they did to germinate. So looks like my Armenian cucumbers are going to be on the same trellis that they were last year. And they're going to have to be interplanted with beans because I had all of the bean seeds that I put over here come up. That might be problematic for the beans. later on in the season because the Armenian cucumbers tend to completely take over. They are massive, massive plants with a ton of foliage. So hopefully I'll get some seeds off of these beans before they are inevitably completely blocked out from sunlight by the Armenian cucumbers. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, I had 2 more leeks go to seed, which is exciting because that really tall one is over here, right there. And I want these guys to go to flower around the same time so that I can actually save some leek seeds this year. That would be super exciting. And although I do have Armenian cucumbers on the rise, I did plant a few actual cucumbers. And these are, I believe these are the going to seed variety. This was a thunder cucumber, which is from Johnny Seeds. It's a hybrid, and it's just failing to thrive. I had a few more in here that have recently died. They got bitten up by roly-polies, so the rest of these I wrapped in aluminum foil. This really helps to cut back on the roly-polies just munching at the base here, and protects against cutworms as well. Using foil to protect against cutworms is something I actually learned about from you guys, my followers, last year when I had almost all of my squash bugs beheaded in my front yard garden because I had no roly-polies up there. It's a very dry, sandy area, and I was like, what on earth is eating my plants? You guys said it was cutworms, and so I wrapped aluminum foil around the base of all of my seedlings, and it totally worked. And I found out this year it also works against roly-polies. Now, roly-polies don't come in and immediately chop off the heads of seedlings. But they do come in and they will just, a mass of them, like you'll see like 10, 20 roly-polies in an area, they'll just be nibbling. And then one day you'll wake up and like half the stem is gone because the plant is still hanging on with the little bit of stem it's got left. The next day it'll just be completely wilted. The stem was completely chewed through and there's a million roly-polies around it. Anyways, the aluminum foil really helps. As you can see, I've got it on all of these plants here. Some of them have outgrown them, but they're still present and protecting. Once the seedling gets big enough, it won't really be damaged by roly-polies, but I usually leave this on anyways, just in case. I'm gonna try and focus on this, see if you guys can see it. But there's some discoloration right here on the stem. It's actually pockmarked from where it's been nibbled on by the bugs and the roly-polies that are right here in this ground. And that's how those little punks start. They're just innocently chewing on the outside, wandering around the base of your plant. You're like, oh, cute little roly-poly. And then the next day it's gone. Oh, both a blessing and a curse in the garden. That's what roly-polies are. But I have had large success this year using the slug and snail bait, Slug-O-Max, and by wrapping the base of all the seedlings. And that means when I transplant, because I do transplant out some squash seedlings, I will wrap those before I transplant them. And then when I'm direct sowing seeds in the garden, I'm checking every single day to see when those seedlings come up. And the minute they pop out of the ground, I am wrapping their base in aluminum foil. Instantly, like right when they awaken to the world. Not that much work, really minimal work to actually have success after so many years of failure. It's really awesome. This is it, guys. It's beautiful. It's so much greener than it was just a month ago. I literally wander out to this garden at least 10 times a day, and I don't even have to do anything out here. I'm just bored in the house or something. I'll be like, oh, I want to go look at the garden. And I just come in here and I wander around, pull a few weeds, pick some bermuda grass, pick some flowers. I love this time of year. gonna head inside and get started on the day. And hopefully my next video will be harvesting the rest of this garlic and onion. I'm so excited to get it out of the bed, guys. All I want to do is plant more plants, and I can do that when my garlic and onion is gone. Thanks for joining me, and I will catch you on the next one.